War used to be just a question of far-off borders for Moscow. According to the Kremlin, sirens could only be heard in border cities like Belgorod, while explosions continued to occur outside the front lines. The capital was shielded by a massive armored garment. Screens announcements and filtered language were used to describe war, but this illusion was destroyed by what happened on October 21st and 22nd, 2025. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has experienced the most severe missile attack. On that day, millions of people realized that the war was not merely a unique operation they watched on TV, rather it was the end of the world coming into their homes. In addition to border cities, sirens were now blaring in Moscow and the suburbs that surrounded it. It was the dreadful sound of Storm Shadow and new generation Peklo rockets, not just the buzz of a drone. Simultaneously, the strategic mechanical complex in Saransk and the enormous chemical plant in Bryansk that provided the Russian army with rocket fuel, gunpowder and ammunition were destroyed. Transformer installations that provided energy to the Russian troops in the Smolensk and Bryansk districts were also struck at the same time. The same wave of attacks also targeted a refinery 200 kilometers away in Makhachkala that provided fuel to the naval facility in the Caspian Sea. The enormous industrial complexes that were left over from the Soviet era allowed these cities to continue. For tens of thousands of Russians, these were their only source of income. Overnight, the people who drove Putin's military machine are now unemployed and without a future. $1 billion building left to ruins or a few warehouses burning down are hardly the only examples. This breakdown is irrevocable and much deeper. In the hushed Saransk industries and the smoke-filled skies of Bryansk, it is the breaking of Vladimir Putin's implicit social contract with the Russian people. This was a straightforward contract. The state ensures your pay security and the regularity of your existence, and you don't question the conflict. This agreement was destroyed on October 21st by the fires of the Flamingo, Storm Shadow, Peklo, and Neptune missiles. Monogorod, which means single city, is a phrase from the Soviet era that helps us comprehend the full extent of this devastation. The varied economic structure of a Western city is absent from industrial cities such as Saransk and Bryansk. Similar to the Soviet era, the hundreds of thousands of people who live in these cities are dependent on a single enormous plant for their whole livelihood. The Saransk mechanical plant and the Bryansk chemical plant serve as the city's heart-lungs and blood circulation, in addition to being sites of employment for those areas. The smoke that emerges from the chimneys of schools, hospitals, heating systems, and every aspect of social life is closely related to these establishments. Information about the economic catastrophe that followed the coup on October 21st, 2022 is piercing Moscow's propaganda barriers. The direct closure of these two sites is not just affecting manufacturing workers, according to independent economic analysts and local employment data. 70,000 to 85,000 people's livelihoods, including smaller workshops that provided ancillary services to these manufacturers, transportation firms, maintenance services, and even neighborhood shopkeepers, where those workers spent their money, have abruptly disappeared according to preliminary estimates. There is no economic slowdown at this time. This is a standstill of the regional economy. Tens of thousands of individuals were suddenly left without a job, food, or future. These protesters in Moscow are hardly liberal campaigners. This group, on the other hand, is Putin's main support base, the one he believed to be unchangeable. They are just regular Russians who continue to labor for the country in silence, support the dictatorship as long as they are paid, and don't challenge the propaganda. That contract has now been ripped apart. The actual scope of the public's response is revealed by data stolen from local Telegram channels, OSINT and V-Contact groups, which depict a wave of fear, rage and betrayal. Complete helplessness and panic are captured in pictures and messages. A worker's post stating, "Our factory is gone," is accompanied by another one expressing hopelessness, in contrast to Governor Bogomaz's false claim that there was no damage. Who will feed us now that we don't have any money? How are we going to survive the winter? A political rebellion is not what this is. It's something much more harmful. It's the voice of cold and hunger. It is the cries of betrayal of a populace that believes the regime has failed to fulfill its core commitment: stability. Vladimir Putin is now stuck in a lose-lose scenario that he is unable to escape. We need to go past the flaming powder kegs and crumbling rooftops to comprehend the actual cost of the October 21st strikes on the Kremlin. The true cost is not counted in billions of rubles, but rather in the lost future and the broken social stability of tens of thousands of devoted Russian citizens who were suddenly thrust into poverty. That is the crisis's anatomy. Putin has been fighting in a different reality up until now. Workers on the home front continued to produce as men perished at the front, earning steady wages. These two worlds have been combined in Ukraine, which has made manufacturing a front line. This is the crucial thing to comprehend in this situation. According to international law, Ukraine is not attacking civilian targets. The objectives are the Saransk mechanical factory, which makes missile components, and the Bryansk chemical plant, which makes gunpowder, according to confirmation from the Ukrainian General Staff HUR and Western intelligence sources. In accordance with the laws of war, these are unquestionably valid military targets. But in a brutal move, the Kremlin has positioned its own citizens as human barriers around these military targets. This is where the Kremlin's trap for its own citizens becomes relevant. These military targets are strategically positioned at the center of the civilian population, at the center of their economic livelihood by Putin's war machine. Putin thus loses the livelihood of his own people as a shield when Ukraine strikes to cut off the fuel for Grad missiles. This is a ruthless betrayal of the people who live under the tyranny. Tens of thousands of people have been held prisoner by the Kremlin in order to fuel its own war machine. The structure of this situation has the Kremlin totally ensnared. There are now only lose-lose choices left for Putin. There is no longer a win-win strategy. The dictatorship is now left alone with these tens of thousands of irate, jobless and skilled people in the middle of immense disarray and hopelessness. We must examine what transpired that evening in greater detail in order to comprehend this turmoil. Her sources said it was the first time Moscow and its outskirts had been subjected to such a severe strike. The chosen sites were strategically significant in addition to being symbolic. The Ukrainian army coordinated the use of fighter jets, numerous unmanned aerial vehicle types, and multiple missile systems in this attack. Precision-guided missiles such Storm Shadow/Scalp, Neptune, Flamingo and Peklo, together with the most recent Ukrainian systems created to get past Russian air defenses, were among the munitions used in the attack. For the first time, guided munitions delivered by the Palyonetsia unmanned aerial vehicle and the Bars long-range missile were tested in the field and were effective in reaching their targets. The same evening, French-British Storm Shadow cruise missiles struck a sizable chemical facility in Bryansk Oblast. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, the facility manufactured explosive components, rocket fuel and gunpowder for Russia's defense industry, and they confirmed the attack. The Russian army was able to continue its artillery and missile attacks on Ukraine thanks in large part to this installation. The assaults in Bryansk continued. Additionally, energy infrastructure in the Smolensk and Bryansk regions was the target of unmanned aerial vehicles. Widespread power outages caused by partially disabled thermal power plants and damaged transformer stations were documented in footage posted on local Telegram groups. Both military and civilian facilities were directly damaged by these attacks. The Saransk mechanical plant, located 670 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, was another significant target that evening. Ukrainian Defense Intelligence said in an official statement that this complex manufactured ammunition weapons and parts for several defense systems. The same round of strikes also targeted a refinery that supplies fuel to the 200-kilometer distance Caspian Sea naval outpost in Makhachkala. Why is the targeting of the factories in Saransk and Bryansk significant? One of the primary suppliers of solid rocket fuel explosives and gunpowder to the Russian army was the Bryansk chemical facility. Specifically, this facility produced the propellant for artillery shells and the fuel for several rocket launcher systems, including Grad and Smerch. In addition to stopping a production line, the destruction of this factory by precise missiles like Storm Shadow also cuts off the lifeline for Russian rocket and artillery weapons at the front. In the meantime, the Saransk mechanical plant manufactured perhaps specialized ammunition parts, as well as vital military parts for drones missiles and other precise weapon systems. The factory was temporarily closed in 2020 because of safety infractions involving the usage of explosive materials. Under Rostec's guidance, manufacturing has been increased once more in order to supply Moscow's war machine. However, Ukraine attacked once more. The attack on this factory demonstrated that even in what it views as its safest depths, Russia is incapable of producing. The refinery owned by Dagnotech is not your typical energy facility. It serves as the Caspian Fleet's fuel core. This refinery, which is situated on the Dagestan coast, produces over 1 million tons of petroleum products a year, which power all military operations in southern Russia, including warships. The Caspian Sea Patrol ships, military convoys, radar and missile systems, and even logistical centers along the coast all use the petroleum generated here. The output of this refinery is the foundation of the entire military presence in the area. And for that reason, Moscow finds it extremely difficult to attack Dagnotech. Russia would be forced to transport marine fuel hundreds of kilometers from other refineries if even a small portion of the refinery's production capacity were to be affected. However, since the majority of those routes are currently the target of Ukrainian drone attacks, this approach is neither affordable nor secure. This implies that the pipelines and the warships will both be quieted when Dagnotech stops talking. Thus, in the midst of industrial centers like Bryansk and the opulent suburbs of Moscow, Putin's social contract with the Russian people was ripped apart in front of millions of people. For years, the war was viewed on television as a special operation occurring in remote parts of Ukraine by Moscow's elite and common Muscovites. There was a dome of invulnerability over the capital. The idea that Moscow was defended by the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, an unassailable fortress, was promoted by Kremlin propaganda. This false sense of a fortress fell apart on the evening of October 21st. Metro stations turned into shelters as sirens sounded and the sky exploded with air defenses, forcing Muscovites to confront the fact that for the first time since World War II, their capital was directly under missile attack. The wealthy elite who lived in opulent complexes realized that Putin's narrative of calm power was false and that the war had reached their homes and comfort zones. At this point, the regime's function as a security provider came to an end. To incite this fear, Ukraine had been identifying targets and accumulating intelligence for months. The whole air defense system in the European portion of Russia had to be rendered blind, deaf and paralyzed before the actual lethal blows were delivered. They used swarms of hundreds of UAVs to do this. These UAVs were mostly decoys. Some were kamikaze drones loaded with explosives. Instead of focusing on a single spot, this swarm swept across hundreds of square kilometers, extending from Bryansk to the outskirts of Moscow and beyond to Dagestan. Hundreds of inexpensive targets appeared on Russian air defense operators' radars out of nowhere. They were unable to tell which targets were $500 decoys and which were actual dangers. To stop these inexpensive UAVs, they had to use pricey Panzer missiles. Russian air defense was therefore overloaded. High-precision cruise missiles penetrated through the blind channels while the UAVs occupied air defense. The Bryansk chemical factory was hit by these stealth missiles, which were built in Britain and France. Fire-and-forget cruise missiles are what these are. They use an infrared camera system to identify their target as they approach fly low and are invisible to radar. This indicates that GPS jamming has no effect on them. The storm shadows flew at tree level, destroying the most vital production lines and the most secure Soviet-built underground bunkers of the Bryansk chemical complex, as Russian Pantsir systems scanned the skies for unmanned aerial vehicles. The core of Russian logistics was struck by this. It wasn't just Western rockets that caused the attack to be so destructive. Russian military bloggers said that Peklo Flamingo and Baz long-range cruise missiles manufactured in Ukraine were on their way to Moscow. These new missiles are land attack variants of the well-known Neptune missile from Ukraine, which destroyed the cruiser Moskva. Russian air defenses were unable to manage the complex multi-layered threat that was produced by the coordinated use of these missiles with drone swarms and storm shadows. We are at a technological standstill. Furthermore, Russia's strategic depth doctrine has been totally weakened by the 670-kilometer deep attack on Saransk. There's nowhere safe now. It is reasonable to target all military installations and factories west of the Ural Mountains. The total penetration of Russia's S-400 dome was demonstrated by this three-pronged attack. Russia can now use Ukraine to attack any location it wants, even its most significant military-industrial assets. This last blow, though, did not occur suddenly. It was the last and deadliest stage of a relentless months-long drive by Ukrainian intelligence to methodically choke off the Russian military-industrial complex. Ukraine started with frontline logistics before moving on to gasoline logistics. It is now destroying the factories that make ammo and weaponry. Russian stockpiles suffered a serious setback when the Saransk mechanical factory and the Bryansk chemical plant were hit. Alexander Bogomaz, the regional governor, posted an absurd statement on his official Telegram account when Storm Shadow missiles were reducing Bryansk's large chemical facility to ashes. There is no damage and everything is under control after we fired down 6 UAVs. The deception failed this time too, as footage captured by Bryansk locals themselves showed the factory turning into a huge fireball that could be seen for miles and was blazing up the sky. Even worse, we hit it with a Storm Shadow cruise missile, not a drone, according to the Ukrainian General Staff's official statement. The truth could no longer be concealed by propaganda. In the perspective of its own people, the state has been shown to be dishonest and inept. Because of this, Vladimir Putin is now stuck in a situation that he cannot escape. The crisis's structure is as follows. Putin had been fighting a war in a different reality up until now. Workers on the home front continued to produce with steady pay while soldiers were losing their lives on the front lines. Ukraine combined these two realities on October 21st. Additionally, it transformed factories into front lines, making it impossible for Putin to both feed his people and his war machine. Bryansk's rocket fuel production line needs sophisticated chemical synthesis units, high-precision specifically alloyed reactors and control systems that were brought in from the West via embargoes. A Saransk mechanical plant that manufactures gyroscopes or unique alloy missile warheads needs millions of dollars worth of CNC equipment that can work with a 10,000th of a centimeter accuracy. In addition to piercing the roof bunker buster missiles such as Storm Shadow destroy the valuable equipment meters below ground when they strike these sites. Furthermore, state-owned businesses like Rostec owned these facilities. This amounts to $1 billion loss. Is Putin able to reconstruct these facilities? It would take years to build such a precision production line from the ground up, even during a war. All of the advanced equipment that these facilities need is imported from South Korea, Japan, or the West. These are now unavailable to Russia, and it doesn't appear that it will acquire them very soon. China's poor quality replicas will never be able to match the level of accuracy or output. There is no assurance that Ukraine wouldn't attack this factory again, even if Putin began to rebuild it. The outcome. It's an industrial catastrophe. This vital industrial capability has been irreversibly lost by Russia for the duration of the conflict. In what way did Putin react to this intractable equation? He turned to frantic revenge since he was unable to come up with a sensible answer. This reaction was not, however, a commensurate response to Ukraine's military-industrial facilities. Russia used more than 400 Geran-2 UAVs and Kinzhal-cut Iskander missiles to assault Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure, hydroelectric power plants, and the CHP-5/CHP-6 heat and electricity plants in Kiev. It was during the events of October 21, 2025 that Russia entered a strategic deadlock. The reason for this is that it is a reversal of the social contract. Putin is trying to establish a sort of equivalency by undermining the stability of the Ukrainian people because he is unable to provide the stability he promised his own people. This is not a move for superpowers. It is the desperate, brutal, and last cry of retaliation for a war that was lost. The irreversibility of industrial calamity is the second checkmate move. The gunpowder factory in Bryansk does not suddenly reappear after Putin's October 22nd attack on a Ukrainian power plant. The Saransk workers' missed wages are not covered. However, the complete collapse of the home front results in the eventual checkmate. The three foundations of Russian society were all destroyed at the same time by the October 2022 attacks. Now that the capital is not untouchable, the elites realize that Putin cannot defend them. This signifies the end of implicit support for the dictatorship and the start of the process of finding a way out. Saransk and Bryansk's main followers have realized that the regime has sacrificed them. There has been no protection for their factories, they no longer have work. The social compact made by Putin is no longer legitimate. This lays the socio-economic foundation for anarchy and possible rebellion. In addition to Russian war journalists' own fear that missiles are headed to Moscow, Governor Bogomaz's denial of any damage has destroyed the state's narrative control. The delusion of Russia as a superpower came crashing down on October 21, 2025. Russia's industrial core was decimated by Ukraine's technological superiority, which also breached its air defenses. Tens of thousands of devoted Russian residents were left jobless overnight as the war spread into the opulent suburbs of Moscow, from Bryansk to Saransk, igniting fear and the ultimate internal collapse. The Kremlin is no longer able to defend its capital, its factories, or its citizens' allegiance. The final collapse is not yet complete. It's the actual collapse. Please remember to click the like button if the information in this video changed your viewpoint. Please let us know what you think in the comments section below. The most potent aspect of this platform is your thoughts. Most importantly, remember to enable notifications and subscribe, because this is a battle for the truth as much as it is a battle fought on the front lines. I'll see you in the upcoming video.